Karoline Livett stood calmly in the U.S. federal court, her navy blazer a stark contrast to the counsel's polished olive suit. The judge eyed her with mocking disdain, his skepticism practically echoing through the chamber. But what unfolded next would leave the entire courtroom in stunned silence and reshape one case forever. Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. If you love captivating stories like this, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow we've got another incredible tale just for you. The judge smirked, shaking his head as he swiftly flipped through the pile of briefs on the bench. The U.S. federal court chamber was eerily still, every eye trained on him, waiting. Then he let out a derisive chuckle, glancing up at Karoline Livett, the 27-year-old White House press secretary. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, her bright eyes unflinching. "Karoline Livett," he said, his voice thick with mockery, "you think you can sidestep justice because Biden's got your back, don't you?" The counsel, a lawyer in a crisp olive suit, flashed a victorious grin. "Your Honor," he interjected. "Karoline Livett, I hope you're ready. This isn't a podium joust, it's a hearing." The chamber was crammed with journalists, pens racing across pads, camera shutters snapping relentlessly. The onlookers whispered, certain Livett was about to falter over her bold claim on education reform. The judge laughed harder, slamming his gavel. Laughter spilled from the gallery. The counsel nodded smugly, confident this would be a televised reckoning. But Livett didn't waver, her gaze fixed on the judge, unnervingly steady. She wasn't one to be boxed in so easily. The crowd held its breath, the press primed for a scoop, convinced the verdict was locked. The judge leaned back in his seat, a taunting smile still curling his lips, his fingers drumming lightly on the bench as if expecting a spectacle. The counsel, tall and lean in his sleek olive suit, stepped to the center of the chamber, his polished brogues clicking on the hardwood floor. He straightened his tie, shot a quick look at Karoline Livett, then faced the bench, his voice polished and brimming with assurance. "Your Honor," he began, pointing directly at Livett, "we are here today because a young woman, a press secretary, has overstepped legal bounds to shield President Biden." The chamber hummed with murmurs, a few reporters hunching over, scribbling furiously. The counsel pivoted, his steely eyes locking onto Livett. At a White House press briefing, the defendant stated, and I quote verbatim, "Our schools bend to Biden's reforms," a claim not only inflated, but a flagrant breach of the Ethics in Government Act, which bars officials from leveraging their role to push misleading narratives for political gain. He held up a sheaf of papers, flipping through a few pages, his tone dramatic. "The evidence is plain, irrefutable." The judge nodded, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses, the edge of his mouth twitching upward. "Thus did the question of what Miss Livett," he cut in, his tone like he was scolding a novice. "I hope you understand the Ethics Act isn't something you can shrug off just because it clips your wings." Chuckles rippled from the gallery, a few Biden supporters frowning. But most of the crowd seemed to tilt toward the counsel. The counsel seized the moment, his voice booming like a practiced oration. She didn't just stretch the truth, she warped it deliberately to bolster the Biden administration's agenda. This isn't her first overreach. We have a catalog of similar remarks, from teacher funding stats to curriculum shifts, all revealing a pattern of exploiting White House media power to deceive the public. He paused, turning to the judge, hand on hip. "Your Honor, this is a shameless disregard for the law." Livett sat there, hands still clasped on the table, her face impassive. Her eyes didn't stray from the judge, showing no trace of panic or rebellion. She just listened, as if biding her time for a moment no one else could foresee. Her blonde hair neatly tied, her lips faintly pursed, she looked more like someone strategizing than a defendant pinned down. The judge banged his gavel, the sharp crack slicing through the air. "Ms. Livett," he said, his voice dropping, "are you going to stay mute forever? This isn't X where you can lean back and wait for a like." Laughter erupted again, louder this time from the gallery and even a few court staff. The counsel returned to his seat, a smug grin spreading across his face, smoothing the edge of his suit jacket as if triumph was already his. But Livett didn't stir. She didn't reply, didn't grimace, didn't show any sign of being shaken. Her blue eyes swept over the counsel, then back to the judge, calm to the point that some in the crowd began to feel uneasy. The whispers faded, replaced by curiosity. What was she waiting for? Why wasn't she reacting? The counsel turned back to the bench, his tone growing even more triumphant. "You see, Your Honor, she has nothing to say. Her silence is her admission." The counsel sat down, his smug smile still plastered on his face, smoothing the edge of his suit jacket as if he'd already clinched the win. The chamber buzzed with murmurs, the judge leaning in to glance at his notes, a few staff nodding at the counsel's reasoning. Reporters bent over their notes, flashes popping relentlessly from the gallery, where the crowd seemed ready to watch Karoline Livett crumble. But Livett stayed put, hands clasped tightly, her face stone cold, those sharp blue eyes fixed on the judge. The judge banged his gavel, the sound cutting sharply through the air. He leaned forward, glasses slipping down his nose, eyes narrowing with mockery. "Miss Livett," he said, his voice dropping but laced with ridicule, "are you just going to sit there forever? This isn't TikTok, where you can toss out a few zingers and duck the fallout." Snickers rippled through the gallery again, a few staff covering their mouths, while the counsel crossed his arms, a victorious glint in his eye as he glanced her way. He paused, tapping his fingers on the bench, his tone growing more challenging. "Or do you think you can whip out some White House press tricks to outsmart us? I suggest you speak before I start wondering if you even belong in this chamber." The laughter grew louder this time, spreading across the gallery from neutral onlookers to a few reporters who'd never liked Biden. A woman in the corner wearing a progressive pin shook her head in frustration, but the laughter drowned out everything else. The counsel jumped in, standing again, hand on hip. "Your Honor, maybe she thinks this is just another briefing where she can prop up Biden with sound bites and stroll off, but today we're dealing with facts, not posts." He turned to Livett, his grin widening. "Do you have anything to say, or should we just proceed without you?" The chamber fell silent for a moment, every eye on Livett. The laughter faded, replaced by a mix of curiosity and anticipation. She still didn't move, but then, for the first time, a faint smile flickered across her lips. Not one of fear, but of someone who knew she held the advantage. She slowly stood, smoothing the hem of her navy blazer, her blonde hair glinting under the chamber lights. Her hands rested on the table, her gaze locking onto the judge, then sweeping to the counsel. "Your Honor," Livett began, her voice smooth but sharp, tinged with that signature Gen Z sarcasm. "I'd like to thank the counsel for this very entertaining show. They nailed the theatrics. Honestly, I almost clapped. But sadly, they picked the wrong target and the wrong plot." The chamber froze. The whispers stopped, reporters' pens hovering over paper. The judge's smile faded, his eyes narrowing, no longer playful but now a mix of surprise and curiosity. The counsel frowned, gripping the edge of his suit jacket, clearly unprepared for this. Livett tilted her head slightly, her smile twitching upward. "They say my silence is a confession, but I wasn't quiet out of fear. I was quiet to hear all their so-called proof before I shred it to bits." A small ooh escaped from the gallery, a few Biden supporters starting to grin, sensing a shift in the air. The judge banged his gavel, but this time not to mock, just to restore order. "Miss Livett," he said, his tone steadier, "if you've got something to say, say it. But I warn you, this isn't a stage for theatrics." Livett nodded slightly, her eyes not leaving him. "I'm not performing, Your Honor. I'm about to show you what the law actually says, not what they want you to believe." She stepped forward a pace, clutching her own stack of documents, ready to flip the script. The chamber went dead silent, every eye glued to Karoline Livett as she stepped forward gripping a thick stack of documents. The faint smile lingered on her lip, but her blue eyes blazed with sharp confidence. The judge straightened up, glasses slipping down his nose, his hands no longer tapping, clearly drawn into the moment. The counsel, still standing, clutched his suit jacket, his triumphant grin gone, replaced by barely concealed tension. "Your Honor," Livett began, her voice smooth but steely, "we keep hearing the counsel rave about the law, the Ethics Act, how I crossed the line. But there's one tiny problem they forgot to mention, or rather chose not to." She held up her documents, flipping quickly to a highlighted page, her finger landing on a marked passage. "This law they're pinning on me was drafted in 1978, before the internet, before X, before TikTok, or anything I used to reach the public even existed. So how can it possibly apply to me? A soft murmur rose from the gallery, a few reporters looking up from their notebooks, pens pausing. The judge squinted, tilting his head as if to object. But Livett didn't stop. She stepped to the side, her tone carrying that Gen Z edge of mockery. They say I violated the Ethics Act with my school reform comment, but let's look at what this law actually says. It bars officials from using their role to manipulate federal programs. I said our schools bend to Biden's reforms in a briefing. That's describing President Biden's policy, not rigging a system. So where's this violation they're talking about? The counsel shot up, his voice rising, almost shouting. This is a dodge. She's deliberately twisting the truth to shield Biden. Livett turned to him, her smile sharpening. A dodge? No, sir, this is logic you haven't caught up to. Let me break it down like explaining a meme to someone who doesn't use X. Snickers broke out from one corner of the gallery where Biden's supporters started nodding in approval. She raised her documents higher, pointing to a line. Section 3.1 of the Ethics Act, a violation has to be directly tied to program interference. My statement was on March 9, 2025, mid-serm. No program changes pending. So what are they charging me with? Telling the truth about policy? She flipped to another page, her tone growing bolder. And here's the best part. If I'd said nothing at the briefing, I'd be violating my job as press secretary, delivering official info. So what's my move? Stay quiet and get sued for not working, or speak up and get sued for saying it straight? This law contradicts itself. The judge raised an eyebrow, looking almost persuaded for the first time. He slid his glasses back on, flipping through his own documents, tracing the lines Livett cited. The counsel cut in, his voice shaky. She's bending the law to escape. The Ethics Act clearly applies to all abuse of power. Livett spun toward him, her gaze cutting like a knife. Abuse of power? I'm just doing my job. You're trying to use a fax machine-era law to police the digital age. It's like using a typewriter manual to fine a smartphone. Ridiculous. A louder ooh rose from the gallery, a few court staff exchanging looks, clearly starting to lean her way. Liv set her documents down, crossing her arms, her tone slowing but heavy with weight. The law needs principles, Your Honor, but this law, it's outdated, vague, and worst of all, it doesn't fit the time we're living in. They say I disrespect the law? No, I'm just pointing out the law they're leaning on doesn't mean squat anymore. The judge banged his gavel, but not as forcefully, as if trying to regain control rather than resist. Miss Livett, he said, his voice calmer, are you saying this law has no value? Livett nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on him. No, Your Honor. I'm saying it doesn't apply to me, and they know it. They just want to use it to silence me, to silence Biden's administration. But I'm not here to play guessing games with obsolete rules. The chamber sank into tense silence, the air thick as if the world held its breath. Karoline Livett stood there, hands resting lightly on her documents, her sharp blue eyes sweeping from the judge to the counsel, then settling on the bench. The Gen Z smirk on her lips had faded, replaced by absolute focus. She knew this was the moment to land the knockout blow. The judge, glasses low on his nose, flipped rapidly through pages, lips pursed, clearly hooked on her argument. The counsel sat frozen, rubbing his face, his eyes flickering between panic and fury. Liv took a deep breath, her voice ringing out, smooth but powerful. Your Honor, she began, lifting her documents. They keep saying I broke the Ethics Act, but let me show you what this law really says and why it can't touch me. She flipped to a marked page, her finger jabbing at bolded text. Section 2.4, I quote verbatim, no action outside the current scope of regulation can be prosecuted unless new law is enacted. So let's ask, has any new law been written to govern a press secretary's public statements online? Nope. A soft ooh sounded from the gallery, a few staff leaning in, eyes lighting up with curiosity. Livett stepped closer to the bench, her tone slowing for emphasis. I said our schools bend to Biden's reforms in a briefing. That's describing Biden's education policy. Not a program push, but even if they want to call it abuse, their law doesn't apply because it hasn't been updated for our time. They're trying to smash something with a 20th century hammer that doesn't even exist in that law. The counsel leapt up, his voice trembling. She's twisting the law. The Ethics Act's purpose is to stop power abuse. She can't dodge it with word games. Livett turned, her gaze razor-sharp, smile twitching. Word games? No, sir, this is the truth you don't want to face. Let me make it clearer, like explaining Wi-Fi to someone still using a rotary phone. Laughter burst from the Biden supporters' corner, starting to clap, but Livett raised a hand for quiet, not done yet. She flipped to another page, her tone growing fiercer. And here's the knockout. In 2019, Smith versus Department of Energy, an official faced similar charges over an Instagram post. The court ruled that if current law doesn't cover new tech, you can't prosecute unless Congress passes something new. That case was decided right here, Your Honor. So what are we doing today? Repeating a loss with precedent? The judge leaned back, tapping the bench lightly, eyes squinting behind his glasses. He flipped through his own papers, hunting the section Livett cited, clearly drawn in. The counsel jumped in, his voice shrill, almost desperate. She's distorting precedent! Smith was totally different. It was personal Instagram, not an official briefing. Livett fired back. No hesitation. Different how? When the law doesn't split personal from official, it just says actions outside scope. And my statements outside the Ethics Act's reach. Did you not read it or just pretend not to? The chamber erupted in murmurs. Staff swapping glances, a few nodding like they just caught on. Livett set her documents down, arms crossed, eyes locked on the judge. They say I disrespect the law, but the law needs logic, Your Honor. If I stay quiet in briefings, I fail the public. If I speak, they sue me with an outdated rule. So what's my play? This law isn't justice. It's a self-contradicting trap. They're trying to lock me in. The judge banged his gavel, the sound faint, like he wasn't sure he still held the reins. Miss Livett, he said, his voice steady but no longer mocking, are you saying this law doesn't apply because it's obsolete? Livett nodded, stepping closer. Yes, Your Honor, and I've got more proof. In 2022, the Office of Government Ethics proposed updating the Ethics Act for digital platforms, but Congress hasn't passed it. So why am I being sued with an unfinished law? This isn't prosecution, it's political revenge. A small cheer broke from the gallery, Biden's supporters jumping up, clapping loudly. The judge banged his gavel harder, but his eyes stayed on Livett, clearly weighing her words. The counsel rose again, hand shaking as he pointed at her. She's deflecting. Her statement misled educators. That's a clear violation. Livett turned, voice ice cold. Misled educators? Schools are still implementing reforms, and Biden's still president. You've got no proof, just empty claims. She paused, facing the bench, her tone slow but weighty. Your Honor, I'm not here to break the law. I'm here to defend my right to speak the truth, a right the First Amendment gives me, you, and this administration. They're not suing me over law. They're suing me because I stand for Biden. But the law isn't a tool to silence anyone. The chamber fell into a stifling silence, the air heavy like the calm before a storm. Karoline Livett stood there, her sharp blue eyes scanning the bench, then returning to the judge, hand resting lightly on her documents, like someone who'd just thrown the decisive punch. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing his temples, his gaze shifting between the papers and Livett, clearly struggling to keep up with her argument. The staff whispered among themselves, a few nodding, eyes bright as if convinced, but the counsel, the man in the now crumpled olive suit, wouldn't go down easily. He sprang up, hands trembling, face flushed with anger and panic. Your Honor, he shouted, his voice piercing the air, holding up a fresh stack of documents like a last-ditch weapon. We have new evidence, irrefutable proof that Miss Livett deliberately broke the law. He strode quickly to the judge's bench, nearly tripping, slamming the papers down in front of him. This is a transcript from the March 9, 2025 briefing. She didn't just say our schools bend to Biden's reforms. She added, teachers will kneel to our vision. A reckless remark that goes way beyond her press secretary duties. The chamber exploded in murmurs, reporters scribbling wildly, flashes popping nonstop. A few Biden supporters in the corner frowned, but most of the audience leaned in, curious for Livett's response. The counsel turned to the bench, his tone dramatic, like he was staging a play. Listen to this. This isn't policy description, it's arrogance, blatant abuse of power. She intentionally confused education stakeholders to prop up Biden's image. The Ethics Act doesn't need updating to prosecute this. It's clear enough. The judge banged his gavel. But the sound was weak, as if he too wanted to hear Livett's comeback. He raised an eyebrow, his voice calm but skeptical. "Ms. Livett, this is a serious allegation. What do you have to say about this transcript?" His eyes locked onto her, waiting for a slip, a crack in her confident armor. Livett tilted her head, a Gen Z smirk flickering across her lips. She stepped to her table, unhurried, flipping lightly through her documents as if she'd anticipated this move. "Your Honor?" she began, her voice smooth but cutting. "I really appreciate the counsel bringing some last-minute drama, but sadly this so-called evidence isn't a knockout. It's a hole they've dug for themselves." She held up a sheet, her finger pointing to fine print. "This transcript was submitted yesterday after the hearing started. If it's so crucial, why wasn't it here from the beginning? Because it's not evidence, it's desperation." A loud "ooh" erupted from the gallery. Biden supporters clapping wildly, a few staff stifling giggles. The counsel spun around, pointing at Livett, his voice shaky. "She's lying. This transcript was recorded right at the briefing. It proves she crossed the line." Livett turned, her gaze icy. "Recorded right at the briefing? Then why does it only show up after I've dismantled your every accusation? Let me guess, you needed time to tweak it, right?" The chamber exploded again, cheers from the audience drowning out the judge's gavel. He banged harder, his face flushed. "Order," he shouted, then turned to the counsel. "Can you verify this transcript's origin?" The counsel stammered, running a hand through his hair, sweat rolling down his forehead. "It's from an official source, Your Honor, but we need time to—" Livett cut in, her tone sharp as a blade. "Time for what? To cook up more evidence?" "Your Honor, I request this transcript be examined. Check the metadata, the edit, timestamps, everything. Because I know it's not as clean as they claim." She faced the bench, her voice slowing, heavy with weight. "They've got nothing but empty accusations. They say I confuse stakeholders. Schools are still following reforms. No proof my words hurt anything. This isn't prosecution, it's political revenge, and they're scrambling to save their sinking ship." The judge flipped through his papers, his eyes darting between Livett and the counsel. "Counselor," he said, his voice lowering, "if this transcript wasn't submitted initially, I need a clear explanation." The counsel opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stood there, hands clutching his head, face pale as if he'd just lost everything. Livett crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping the room. "Your Honor, they're not suing me over law. They're suing me because I represent Biden. But the law isn't a tool for revenge and desperation." She smirked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Desperation isn't a legal strategy. It's just desperation." The chamber sank into a stifling silence, the tension so thick you could hear each breath. Karoline Livett stood tall, arms crossed, her sharp blue eyes scanning the bench before settling on the judge. The counsel slumped in his chair, hands gripping his head, papers scattered messily before him, his face ghost-white like a man stripped of hope. The gallery was dead quiet. Reporters stopped writing, flashes ceased, everyone awaiting the decisive moment. The judge banged his gavel, the sound crisp and final, though his hand trembled slightly as if he too felt the weight of the situation. He removed his glasses, rubbed his temples, his gaze shifting between Livett and the papers in front of him. He took a deep breath, his voice dropping. Devoid of the earlier mockery, "Miss Livett," he began, locking eyes with her. "I'll admit I walked into this chamber thinking you were just a young, inexperienced girl trying to shield President Biden with some clever spins." A soft murmur rose from the gallery, but he raised a hand for silence, his voice growing clearer. "I laughed. I doubted you. But after what I've just heard, after reviewing your arguments and the counsel's so-called evidence, I can't deny I was wrong." He paused, flipping quickly through pages, his finger tracing lines Livett had cited. "You didn't just refute the charges, you exposed a truth. This case was built on shaky, unstable ground." The counsel looked up, face contorted, about to object, but the judge banged his gavel, his stern gaze sweeping over him. "Don't interrupt, counselor. I'm not done." He turned back to Livett, his tone carrying a reluctant respect. "You've shown that the Ethics Act, as it stands, doesn't apply to your statements in the digital age. And you're right, Section 2.4 demands new law for actions beyond its current scope, and Congress hasn't done that. The Smith v. Department of Energy precedent backs you up. I can't ignore this logic." The chamber erupted in cheers from the Biden corner, supporters leaping up, clapping furiously, some raising phones to live stream. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, face red. "Order! Order now!" he yelled, but the corner of his mouth twitched as if he couldn't stop the shift in the air. The counsel bowed his head, gripping his chair, no fight left in him. Livett stood there, not smiling, not clapping, just a slight nod, her eyes sweeping the bench to ensure they got it. The judge cleared his throat, sitting up straighter, his tone more formal. "As for this so-called new evidence, the transcript the counsel introduced, it's not just late, it lacks clear providence. I agree with Miss Livett. If it mattered, it would have been here from the start. This inconsistency only weakens their case further." He paused, scanning the chamber, his gaze landing on Livett. "Miss Livett? I don't know where you learned law, from college, experience, or Biden himself, but you've done what few do in this room, made me rethink everything. I can't find a legal basis to continue this case, therefore," he banged his gavel one last time, the sound final like a full stop, "the court finds you not liable. Case dismissed." The room exploded. Biden supporters roared, some raising fists, shouting progressive slogans. Reporters bolted from their seats, shoving toward the door for breaking headlines. The counsel buried his face in his hands, papers spilling to the floor, lifeless. Livett stood still, her eyes brightening slightly, not with arrogance, but pride. She'd just defended herself, Biden, and the principles she believed in. The judge stood, his black robe swishing lightly, but before leaving the bench, he turned to Livett one last time. "Miss Livett," he said, voice quieter, almost just for her. "You're a formidable opponent, I won't forget this day." He nodded slightly, then stepped down, leaving the chamber in chaos. Livett returned to her table, hand resting on her documents, eyes scanning the gallery. She didn't need to say more. Her victory spoke for itself. A supporter shouted from the crowd, "Caroline, you made Biden proud." She gave a faint smile, her first of the hearing, then bent to organize her papers as if it were just another workday. The chamber slowly emptied, but the echo of the ruling lingered. Karoline Livett stood by her table, hand resting lightly on her documents, her blue eyes sweeping the now sparse gallery. The cheers of Biden supporters had faded, replaced by the hurried footsteps of reporters rushing out, phones pressed to ears, voices urgent with newsroom updates. The counsel, once smug in his olive suit, quietly gathered his papers, face pale, not daring to meet anyone's gaze. The judge was gone, but his admission, "I was wrong," hung like a final hammer strike, sealing Livett's win. She smiled faintly, her first of the hearing, not the Gen Z smirk, but a deep satisfaction. She'd done what no one expected, beaten a case built to take her and Biden's administration down. But this wasn't just a personal win. It was a statement, a milestone, and she knew it. Livett bent down, packing her documents into her briefcase, eyes alight, as if she'd just completed a mission bigger than herself. Outside the U.S. federal court, chaos reigned. Reporters swarmed the exit, mics raised, flashes relentless. "Miss Livett! Miss Livett!" Shouts came from all directions. A young journalist, hair disheveled, pushed forward, voice urgent. "How do you feel winning this case?" "Any words for the counsel?" Livett paused, turning, her gaze calm but piercing. She adjusted her navy blazer, then replied, voice steady and weighty, "I feel like logic and truth did their job." "The counsel? I hope they learn the law isn't a tool for revenge, it's for protection." The crowd hushed for a second, then erupted with new questions. "Do you think this is a win for Biden?" Another reporter yelled. Livett smiled faintly, eyes glinting. "It's a win for truth, and yes, for President Biden, who taught me never to back down from speaking it." She turned, walking through the throng, leaving murmurs and stunned looks behind. On social media, the story spread like wildfire. Caroline wins shot to X's top trend in under an hour, with tens of thousands of posts from Biden fans and neutrals alike. One account wrote, "Karoline Livett just schooled the legal system. Don't mess with Gen Z progressives." Another posted, "She didn't just win. She made outdated law look foolish." Hearing footage live-streamed by supporters hit millions of views. Comments flooding. "Judge laughed at the start, shut up by the end. Caroline's unreal." At the White House, word reached President Biden fast. Livett sat in her car, phone buzzing, with a call from a familiar number. She answered, Biden's voice booming through, warm and triumphant. "Caroline, you did great. I watched it all. They didn't know what hit him. Best press secretary I've ever had." Livett smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "Thank you, sir. I just did what you taught me. Don't back down. Don't apologize." Biden laughed heartily. "That's right. Now get back here. We've got work to do." As the car rolled through D.C.'s busy streets, Livett gazed out the window, eyes distant. She recalled her early days with Biden, from junior press aide to the youngest press secretary ever. She remembered late nights studying law in college, prepping for moments like this, and she thought of the pressure of motherhood, her 8-month-old son waiting at home. But today, she didn't just fight for herself. She fought for principle, for Biden, and for a young generation dismissed by an old system. Back home, Livett stepped through the door, heels clicking on the hardwood. Her husband, a low-key businessman, rose from the couch, their baby boy in his arms. "I saw it all," he said, eyes shining with pride. "You shut him down." Livett smiled, taking her son, kissing his forehead. "Mommy had to, sweetie, so you grow up in a world where truth still matters." She sat, shoulders relaxing, but her eyes still blazed. She knew this wasn't the end. Media dissected the case from MSNBC to Fox News. An MSNBC liberal pundit praised Caroline Livett didn't just win, she's the new icon of young, smart, fearless progressives. Meanwhile, a reluctant Fox analyst admitted she exposed a legal gap. We can't pretend old laws still cut it. Legal experts debated on X. One lawyer writing, "Livett's forcing us to ask, is the law lagging behind the times?" But the bigger impact lay elsewhere. Livett's win sent a loud message to Biden's administration. They had a spokesperson not just loyal, but sharp enough to face any challenge. Political rivals grew wary. If a 27-year-old could dismantle a case like this, how strong was Biden's team? An opposition figure whispered in Congress's halls, "She didn't just win, she's making us rewrite our playbook." Livett, meanwhile, was back at work the next day. She stood at the White House press podium, eyes confident as if no hearing had happened. A reporter asked, "Do you think the law needs to change after this case?" Livett tilted her head, a Gen Z smirk creeping up. "Laws, like tech, if it doesn't update, it gets left behind. I'm not here to break it, but to make it evolve." Her answers spread fast online, sparking a bigger debate. Young TikTokers posted videos dubbing her Gen Z's political queen, while progressive lawmakers floated Ethics Act reforms. But for Livett, it was just another day proving youth, logic, and truth could topple even the most outdated systems. Caroline Livett's U.S. federal court saga starkly reflects America's polarization and rapid societal shifts, especially in 2025's political landscape, where social media and news shape opinion like never before. Livett, a 27-year-old press secretary, faced the Ethics Act, a 1978 law, to defend Biden's education reform remarks. Her win wasn't just personal, it was a wake-up call for a legal system lagging in the digital age. She argued old laws can't govern modern platforms, like when she asked, "How do you fine a smartphone with a typewriter manual?" mirroring America's reality where law often trails tech and Gen Z's culture. When the council threw out a fake transcript, it showed the desperation of those clinging to power with tricks, a familiar sight in modern U.S. politics. The takeaway? In a nation prizing free speech like America, you've got to challenge the system when it's out of touch. Learn from Livett. Study hard, like her citing Smith v. Department of Energy. Stay cool under fire and hit back with logic. Don't fear old laws or media. Like Livett said in Part 8, law has to evolve for today's Americans, especially the young. It's a call to action. Stand up, know your rights, and force change, because truth doesn't bow to obsolescence. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss stories of logic beating the system like Caroline Livett's. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video to uncover more truth together. Caroline Livett's U.S. federal court triumph unveils a deeper truth. Resilience and reason can outshine outdated systems when you dare to question them. Her saga teaches us that clinging to obsolete rules, be it laws or personal habits, stifles progress, while bold clarity can rewrite the game. In 2025's fast-evolving world where tech and ideas leap ahead, Livett shows that standing firm, armed with knowledge, isn't just defiance, it's survival. Apply this to life, challenge the old ways holding you back, whether it's a job, a mindset, or a fear. Study hard, stay sharp, and speak your truth, like she did with Smith v. Department of Energy. The real win? Turning obstacles into stepping stones. Thanks for watching this journey of logic over legacy. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and join us next time to uncover more stories that inspire real change.